In 10 feet, I had 18 punctures, and both tires just went totally flat.
So it was both tires?
It was both tires.
Welcome to the Exploring Washington State podcast. Here's your host, Scott Cowan.
All right, everybody. Welcome back to this episode of the Exploring Washington State podcast. I am now sitting with Ed Marquand, and we are sitting in Tieton, Washington. And Ed, you have an interesting story, but I want to start you off. I really want to hear the kind of the origin story of you and Tieton.
Well, my partner and I live in downtown Seattle, and now we live here too. So we go back and forth across the Cascades pretty regularly. I spend much more time here in Tieton than I do in Seattle. For 40 years, I've had a art book publishing company based in Seattle. We produce books for museums all over the country. My partner's an attorney. About 30 years ago, we bought a very large piece of property about 15 miles from Tieton, and we built a little tiny cabin. It's off the grid. It's fireproof. It's just a little bunker that sits on this beautiful piece of property. And we liked spending time there, but since it's off the grid, it wasn't easy to do work there. We could chill out for a couple of days, but that was about it. In 2005, I took a bike ride from the cabin toward Yakima, saw the sign down in Natchez directing me to Tieton, and I thought, well, I'll go check it out. So I rode up the grade and spun around town. Tieton is a small town. It's about 1,400 people. It's about 70% Latino. The town isn't particularly distinguished architecturally, but it has a beautiful little park in the center and 4 blocks of retail around the park. So it's kind of set up like a little bit like a little Midwestern town. In 2005, many of the storefronts were empty. We're surrounded by apple and pear orchards. It's a beautiful country. It's on the dry side of the state, and but its proximity to Yakima really kind of worked against the retail in town. Also, with changes in the agriculture business and small farms consolidating and agribusiness taking over chunks of farms and getting bigger and bigger and bigger, really put a strain on small family farmers. So many of them moved out of the way. Some of the farms went bankrupt, and that didn't do anything to help the retail in poor little Tieton. When I showed up on my bike in 2005, about half the storefronts on the square were empty and had been for about a decade. So there wasn't the bowling alley, there wasn't the movie theater, there wasn't the hair salon, there wasn't the shoe repair store, there wasn't the variety store, there wasn't the butcher shop. So all those businesses went away, and as much as people in the community wanted them to come back, the economic pressures and proximity to Yakima really made the restoration of those businesses impossible. Everybody in town wanted some businesses to come back, or some businesses, but they could never figure out what businesses those could be. So I'm spinning around town on my bike, and I pull into the back of an abandoned warehouse, fruit storage warehouse, pulled into the parking lot and hit a whole bunch of goat head thorns. In 10 feet, I had 18 punctures, and both tires just went totally flat.
So it was both tires?
was both tires.
Oh, okay.
So I pushed the bike into the park and spent the rest of the day with my little tiny patch kit trying to repair these inner tubes so I could get back to the cabin. So as I was patching the tires and noticing these storefronts, I started wondering, well, with real estate prices, with studio space at such a premium in Seattle, I wonder what sorts of businesses could make sense in these spaces that could also hire people from the community to train them to do work at a very, very high level, thereby improving the economy of the town, occupying these spaces, but also fulfilling creative ambitions from urban areas. And here we are 16 years later, and that basic model has played out in these spaces in a variety of different ways. And that's what we're going to talk about today.
So I've got a couple of questions based on that first story. How long did it take you to patch the bike? I mean, that's so you were sitting here for a little while.
It was about 3 hours.
Okay. And what was your partner's response when you rode back and you said, I've got this idea? Was it?
Well, he said, well, let's go check it out.
Okay.
And we rode around, drove around and walked around the next day. And he grew up in a town that's about the same size as Tieton in upstate New York. And that town essentially died because there were no ideas of ways to develop a narrative for some sort of a successful future. And that's a problem that small towns have across the country. And it's my belief, 16 years into this project we call Mighty Tieton, that without that narrative for some sort of a successful future, these small towns are doomed. Mm-hmm. And as much as people would like them to remain the way they were in the 50s and 60s and 70s, the economic pressures are never going to allow that. Now, in the case of Tieton, we've created this hands across the Cascades business model. So it's dependent on the needs from outside this area. Mm-hmm. What I've discovered in the years that we've been here is that the locals would really like to see solutions come from the town itself. But I just don't think that's possible anymore. And with the internet and with tech, there are so many really interesting and exciting opportunities outside the area that can be connected to the local resources. Mm-hmm. So what are those local resources? Property. When we started buying storefronts and a couple of warehouses around here, the property prices just seemed so ridiculously low, and they were. Renovation costs were not. It took much more money to renovate these spaces than we ever expected. But here we are into it, and we've made good progress. But the real resource in this town and in towns all over the place are the people who live here, who are really hungry to connect to the broader creative fields. And, they have creative ambitions too. Because of the internet, they're well aware of what's going on in the rest of the world. But if they can't leave this area, or they don't want to leave this area, thanks to the internet, there are now ways for them to connect that just wouldn't have been possible a decade ago. I think COVID has also demonstrated that there are so many things that can be done without leaving where you're living. And the world is much, much more connected through the internet than it was a decade ago. And that opens all sorts of exciting possibilities.
So when you first started up here, the internet's evolved a lot in those 16 years, but how is connectivity up here? Do you have good infrastructure for that here?
Well, it can always be better, but I'll tell you, I have a condo in downtown Seattle, and my main design business, the publishing business, is right downtown Seattle. And in my studios here in Tieton, I have fiber optic. Mm-hmm. I can't get fiber optic in downtown Seattle.
Right.
Because of the buildings, not because it doesn't exist there, but because of the buildings. Mm-hmm. The buildings are not capable of accessing fiber optic.
When we moved to Wenatchee from the Tacoma area, I started calling around and, it's $49.95 a month. I'm like, okay, so first off, I won't mention the main cable provider in Puget Sound. We all know that, but and I'm like, well, that's a third of what I was paying. Yeah. Oh, and it's a gigabit. What? Yeah, I was huge perk about moving over to Wenatchee for me was the robust connectivity. So that's evolved. So you mentioned something. Okay, so the initial cost was low to buy. Renovations, however, wow. No project ever hits its budget, does it?
No.
Yeah, no. What was the first building that you started with? And what did you open first? And then the other part of that question is, so from the time that you're spending fixing your flats, how long was it before you actually made an investment in the community?
Well, I was fixing the flats in the middle of April 2005. That summer, we brought all these friends from Seattle, most of whom owned their own businesses. They were architects, they were designers, maybe gallery owners, people in the food industry, people in the beverage industry, photographers, retailers, whatever, but small business people. Mm-hmm. And we'd sit in the park and try to imagine what these spaces could become that would make sense for the people who live in the community today when we're
right
envisioning, but also what could attract more people to come to town, to spend more money to help the economy of the town. The first building we bought was a big abandoned warehouse that had been a fruit storage warehouse, and it had been empty for about a decade. We bought it at auction. And then the very next building we bought was another large building that had been deserted for about 12 years. And this group was very lively and fun group of small business owners. We all decided that we would take the second warehouse and convert those to loft spaces, studio loft spaces, that this group could buy to get some of these ideas up and running. The big warehouse we converted to an event space, and then we started putting studios in, a wood shop, a metal shop, to provide some support for doing a lot of the construction and renovation on the other buildings. Then there were a couple of storefronts that we bought. There was the old pharmacy. There was the old television repair place. There was the variety store. And those places, too, had been empty for over a decade. But we started buying them at the end of 2005. So the flat tire happened April 2005. We started actually making commitments. Yeah, about 8 months. So that that really got us committed, and it also got other people committed, but it also got their juices flowing, and we started to really make a commitment to the community. The people we met here, and the people in the Tieton is a city, so it has a city hall, it has a professional staff, and they were very, very excited because in converting the one building into lofts, our building permit application was the first one they'd had in 3 years.
Did they remember how to fill it out?
It wasn't a hard form to remember how to fill out. But, they were really struggling. And a lot of it had to do with big changes in the agriculture industry in this area. Mm-hmm. So many of the farmers were much too heavily invested in Red Delicious apples. Nobody was buying Red Delicious apples anymore. And it was very expensive to convert the orchards into organics or more varietals. I think our timing was good for what happened, but it was really a town on its heels in 2005.
Well, let me ask you this: just how did Tieton, not to bring up hopefully it's probably a touchy subject, but how did Tieton handle the Great Recession of 2008 and all of that? Was it severely impacted up here?
Well, we finished the loft project and sold the last unit 2 weeks before the Great Recession.
Wow.
So we dodged a massive bullet. Tieton and the Yakima Valley in general suffers from these things generally later. Mm-hmm. Agriculture is a good industry in that it's a pretty stable industry over long periods.
Right.
And in town, there were still plenty of jobs in the fruit packing warehouses and managing the orchards and mm-hmm. so on. The people who live here aren't really doing the work that migrant laborers do, mm-hmm. but they do a lot of orchard management. They do a lot of transportation, packing, that sort of work. Mm-hmm. So I don't know that they were as hard hit mm-hmm. as they might have been.
Okay.
Nobody had a great time during that time.
Nobody had a great time.
But there we are.
Okay. So the loft was kind of the first project.
It was.
And how many units did you guys convert?
14.
14 units.
Yeah. And they're very comfortable, and that's where I live now. And many of the people who invested in the initial construction are still there. Mm-hmm. But the architect Philip Christophides was the architect, and he was involved in all these conversations we were having early on. But he I think rightfully said, look, if we make this commitment, and if these creative business owners with all these great ideas of businesses that could fill these spaces here, if they make a commitment to real estate in Tieton, they're much more likely to stay engaged. And that proved to be true. Mm-hmm. Now, however, your question about the recession, since we're all independent, small, creative business owners, we were all clobbered. Mm-hmm. Those businesses were in Seattle. The architect, he had to shutter his business. Right. Galleries really suffered. The restaurants suffered. Everybody really suffered. And it had an impact on the ideas of what we wanted to do here in Tieton. So a number of the ideas we were so excited about getting off the ground, restaurant, tourist destination kinds of activities, that sort of thing, really just had to be put on hold. Mm-hmm. And they're now, 16 years later, really taking a much stronger hold. But that recession really threw us back on our rears.
Right. Okay. When we've talked before, you've somewhat facetiously call yourself the hand waver, and I laugh at that. But once again, I'm seeing an example of that when you had flat tires in April, you'd gathered a group, and by the end of the year, you guys are investing in this vision. That's pretty amazing as far as I'm concerned.
Well, or
crazy, but
incredibly naive.
Yeah, well, it could be all those things, but it's worked out. Even you're still here.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
What was next? I mean, what? So the studio space came. How did you come up with the name Mighty Tieton?
Mighty Tieton just occurred to me. The Tieton River is a few miles from here, and it hooks up with the Natchez River that hooks up with the Yakima River down in Yakima. And I was just playing with names, and I just thought, okay, the Tieton River, and rivers are often described as being mighty.
Right.
Tieton wouldn't be classified that way, but the name stuck, and here we are. And then Carrie, a wonderful old friend who was really instrumental in getting so many of these projects here going, always kind of thought of it as in a Mighty Mouse kind of way. Here we are, this little tiny scrappy town, and these little scrappy independent business people, and we were trying to punch above our weight, and here we are. But the name stuck, and it's kind of memorable.
Yeah.
But the businesses. So I'm thinking, okay, we bought the old pharmacy that had been empty for a decade. What are we going to do there? It's a beautiful old space. And when I say beautiful, to me, workmanlike is beautiful.
Okay.
None of the architecture in town here is distinctive. It doesn't have any trim or decoration or whatever. These are concrete block buildings. Some of them are covered, some of them are not. But they're very workmanlike. But the park in the middle of town is the thing that really gives the town its charm. But with this pharmacy, I was thinking, well, okay, what business am I going to start here? I publish art books for museums all over the country, and we've been at it for about 4 decades now. And I have a very, very talented staff in Seattle of designers and editors and production people. Over the years, we've worked with about 300 museums around the country, so we're pretty well known in that field. I came up with the idea of creating a studio that makes limited edition, handmade art books that are for a similar clientele, very few copies, much higher price points, and items that would be sold into museum collections, special collection libraries, and private book collectors. We know a lot of people in the art world, and I just thought, yeah, we can put together some very, very interesting partnerships, and that's what we've done. But we also, the Seattle office moved to its current location, which is at 2nd and Union in downtown Seattle. It came with the storefront, so we opened Paper Hammer. Paper Hammer is my little shop. And about half the merchandise we sell at Paper Hammer, we make here in Tieton. So when we're slow doing the editions, we fill in by creating merchandise that we can sell in downtown Seattle. We also now have a little retail shop on the square, and we sell a lot of that merchandise there as well. So that was the first business that I started here. But the studio that is kind of blowing up right now in the best possible way is Tieton Mosaic. in about 10 years ago, I got a call from Chris Tucker, who was then the head of the Washington State Arts Commission, ArtsWA. She told me about a grant program called Our Town that was an initiative of the National Endowment for the Arts. She says, we like what you're doing in Tieton, this combination of community, enterprise, art, and design. If you can come up with a proposal that we like, we can give you a grant writer to help you go after grant money from the National Endowment. So a woman who was working for us at the time and I sat down and she said, well, you've always expressed admiration in the platform mosaics in the New York subway system. The platform like Columbus Circle and 57th Street and Times Square, all these mosaics that are 100 years old. She says, well, why don't we start a studio to do that kind of work? And I thought, sure, okay, I'm a graphic designer by training and profession. I know a fair amount about typography. And sure, let's just go for that. Never in the million years thinking we would actually get this grant. We submitted the grant application, and a few months later, we got notice from the NEA that we had been awarded this grant to create some directional signage around the town of Tieton using glass mosaic. So we needed to train ourselves up to be able to do that work.
I'm going to interrupt you. You mean I don't know. Well, it's too late. They already gave you the money and you're already in business, but you hadn't done any mosaic work before the grant was awarded.
No, but I knew enough about the technique to know that it would be perfectly capable of learning how to do it.
I'm kind of giving you a hard time, but it's like, wow.
Sure. Well, and the kind of mosaics we were interested in doing was signage. It wasn't some of the incredibly artistic, complicated traditional mosaics from 2,000 years ago.
Right.
It was going to be more like the New York subway mosaics.
Sure.
And those are much, much easier to learn how to do. But as soon as the announcement was made that we had received this grant, a fellow named Steve Morgan from Natchez, just down the hill, showed up and offered his services and said, I think I'd be really good at that. So I said, great. We hired a couple of mosaic artists from Seattle to come over to teach us how to do this work. Steve took to it just like fish to water. He was really born to do this work. And a couple of other people showed up, or friends of friends showed up. And, before we know it, we have a nice little mosaic studio and we're working on the NEA mosaics. Now, we also had to raise an additional $100,000 to be able to get the studio up and going, but we were able to do that through private donations and some additional foundation money. But the idea was to do an art project that would continue to create jobs in the community amongst the people who live here, hire people from the community, because that's always been an important part of the mission. So when we finished the signage project, which we did on time, on budget.
How many signs did you guys
We did 6.
6 signs, okay.
So there's a welcome to Tieton and then some of the parks and some directional signage on the streets.
So
outside.
that wasn't the Apple Box logo ones. This is
no.
Okay.
But as we were finishing that project up, we got a couple of commercial commissions from companies in Yakima, some really nice ones. We got better and better at doing the work and really kind of, grew into the skill that was needed. And then another fellow who worked for us applied for another National Endowment for the Arts grant, but he didn't tell anybody that he was applying for these grants nor did he really explain what the grant application involved. I mean, he probably mentioned it, and I didn't really take it seriously because we didn't expect to get the first one, and I really didn't expect to get any more. And then he moved away, moved to the East Coast. One day we get a letter from the NEA saying that we had gotten this grant. And I just thought, holy moly, what's he obligated us to do? We got $48,000 from the NEA, but he obligated us to a project that really cost $250,000. So I had to be the one to go out and raise the rest of the money. But we came up with this project. It was all based on coming up with mosaics that would be displayed around the park, around the square, featuring vintage fruit label murals blown up into 7-foot wide mosaics. They include like 10 to 14,000 little pieces of hand-cut glass. They're really beautiful. Mm-hmm. But when I realized how proud some of the families are around here about their fathers, their parents, their grandparents, then it became a bit of a legacy project, and it was easier to raise the money, and it was going to be really transformative for the town of Tieton. It would give people a reason to come here any day of the year, drive around, admire these fruit labels, mm-hmm. and so on. If nothing else is open, the fruit labels are entertainment enough. So that project took about 2.5 years. We completed it.
And how many of those?
There's seven of those mosaics, and they look great, and people love them, mm-hmm. and it's fun to watch people take selfies in front of them. One of them we had to do a Kickstarter campaign, but anyway, the community was just really, really terrific and very pleased with the result. And then after that was completed, we heard about a contract through Sound Transit in Seattle mm-hmm. To produce mosaics for a station in Redmond. And that's the project we're in the middle of right now. It's a big project. There are 5 people working pretty much full time in the studio. We have about 11 of them done to date. They just really, they look so great. And when they're done, they're going to be great advertising for the town of Tieton, but also Tieton Mosaic.
So when you gave me a quick tour through the area mm-hmm. before, those are with they're different artist designs, correct? And they're
yes.
Are they Washington State artists that were awarded these?
Yes.
Okay.
And for the most part, they're King County. Well, I think Seattle and Tacoma artists were the 6 who were selected by Sound Transit.
Okay.
So we're not doing the design work on those. We're doing the production.
Right.
Work. So Sound Transit selects the artist, and then we collaborate with the artists to take their ideas, which were, for the most part, paintings or graphics, and translate them into the form where they can be glass mosaics.
Okay. In what you showed me, those are very interesting as well. But the apple boxes, I think, are really, I just think they're very...
Yeah.
You guys should keep doing more of those.
Well,
yeah, I know.
If there are fruit families around who want to commission us, we're more than happy to.
We'll put a link in the show notes for that.
Thank you. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Oh, you opened a mercantile?
Yeah.
Did I tell you my observations when I went in it the first time? So when I went in it the first time, I was looking around, and I was like, this is an interestingly curated selection of items. What on earth is Filson doing in here? Who's going to buy Filson up here? This is my initial thought. And you're smirking.
Yeah.
And I'm standing around. I'm just looking at this, and I'm like, this is cool, but Filson? Really? 3 people walk in from across the street from the gallery. 70s age. I don't know, a little older than me. And guys walking around. Next thing I know, he's got a Filson vest up at the counter. He goes, and it was comical because he said something, and I don't have the exact words, but he said something like, well, what my sweater that I'm wearing now, I bought it at a thrift store 20 years ago for 10 cents or something. It's time for me to get a new one. And he bought a Filson vest. And I just thought, okay, so never judge a book by its cover. I mean, but it's a very interestingly curated selection of goods.
Yeah.
How has that been received? I mean, obviously you're selling Filson vests, but I mean, how has that been?
Yeah. Well, my partner, Mike, is pretty stubborn, and he early on bought that building without even telling me, and the building to me just looked like such a mess, and I just thought, this is a tear down, and I was a little annoyed that he bought this building. It was it was super cheap, but it was going to cost a small fortune to fix up and to turn it into anything, because it had gone through so many iterations, none
remodeled.
Of them, none of them improving the space. And he got annoyed with me. He says, "Oh, forget it. We're never going to have enough money to tear it down and build something new. So let's rip the ceiling off, see what the bones of the building are like,
okay, and
see what we have." And I said, "Okay, you're on." So we yanked off the crappy, the ceiling stuff with the Jesus dust and everything, ripped that off, and turns out it was actually a really great building. It had heavy timber, had these great posts, tall enough ceiling, but it was just built. It was just so rugged. And it completely changed our attitude about the building. We had to replace the windows, replace the roof, put in heat.
Did he tell you I told you so?
He didn't have to.
Okay.
Yeah. I'm pretty good at admitting when I'm totally wrong, because he's almost always right.
Okay.
But then we fixed it up, and then thought, well, wouldn't it be nice to have a little shop here? We stumbled into Craig Singer, who is a chef, but he also grew up in a family that had a fly fishing store. So he grew up in that little world, and he's very involved in recreational equipment and camping and things. And so he ended up opening the little restaurant we have, mm-hmm. and taking it over. And then he also decided that his merchandise, what he would really like to do is start this little shop. So we started it. He started it. He's the one who's made all the connections with Filson and Topo Design and Smart Wool and all these companies. And that part of the store, that half of the store with all the cool recreational equipment, that's his deal. The other half is mine, where we have some of the merchandise that we make here, and we buy some merchandise in here. But it really was another light on in the square. Mm-hmm. I think the locals, certainly the people from Yakima and the visitors we get from out of town, are kind of surprised and delighted when they come in the store, because it's pretty quality. It's good stuff.
I didn't know what to expect, and I walked in and I was like, wow, this isn't what I expected.
Well, and if it's any of any interest, it consistently outperforms the downtown Seattle shop.
Really?
Yeah.
Wow.
That says as much about the condition of downtown Seattle right now. But it is remarkable, given that it's only now open 3 days a week, that it does as well as it does. But at the same time, we don't have nearly the overhead here that we have in Seattle. And my partner and I work at the shop on weekends, and mm-hmm. I give tours from there. And, there's a fair amount of interest in the region, Tieton, and this gives us a good platform to start from.
Okay. I'm sorry. My eyes are doing this really weird, like prismatic stuff, and I'm just like trying to rub them here for a second.
You don't get migraines.
No, I don't have a headache at all. It's just.
Yeah, I know. It'll go away in a minute or two.
Well, it's been a few minutes of it. It's like, this is weird. Okay, sorry.
Okay.
Todd, cut that out, please. Don't let that go. Yeah, this is the episode where Scott had no. Well, I want to go back to your book binding. And so we've got the mosaics, we've got the mercantile, you've got your book binding. There's Box Gallery in town. Mm-hmm. There's another artist space where they rent artist space to studio, or studio space to artists, not artist space to studios. You've got the converted Apple warehouse. Just out of curiosity, just to back that up for a second, that must have been a super smooth process to convert an old fruit warehouse into livable spaces. I mean, no problems there at all.
Well, it was actually easier than you would think. The architect, Philip Christophides, had a very clear vision. It was not a fruit storage warehouse. It was a fruit transit warehouse.
Okay.
So it was 2 floors, 28,000 square feet, big beams and timber masonry. Oh, okay. And it was very easy, the way the space was divided up, to imagine 2-story loft spaces, each one with about 1,400 square feet of space.
Wow. The
upstairs ceilings are 18 feet tall. The downstairs ceilings are 11 feet. But that part was very easy to see. It was a very clean building. Mm-hmm. So the construction took a year. We used all local contractors, of course, because we want the jobs to stay in town here. And we'd hire any of them again. They did such a good job. And I think they were really, they'd never worked on anything like it before, but they were very proud when it was all done. The big warehouse was a cold storage warehouse. So there were ammonia tanks and refrigeration equipment that needed to be gotten out of there. There was old packing equipment that needed to be gotten out. But it was a pretty clean building as well. In that space, we started having events, either community events like the Holiday Crafts Bazaar. Mm-hmm. We had a couple of antique shows, but we also started having Day of the Dead events, the annual open house. And then we realized that we could really generate some money by renting it out for weddings, quinceañeras, corporate events, retreats, that sort of thing.
Right.
That has been, that was a very important source of revenue. COVID put the kibosh on that, but we're opening back up, and that business is coming back. But there's a real need in the Yakima area for interesting, flexible spaces. I think it's a popular venue because every couple who comes in for a wedding can decorate it the way they want. They're not limited by either hotel convention rooms or whatever. It is a warehouse. So they can pretty much do what
it's a blank slate.
It's a blank slate. Yeah. Okay. But it's been a pretty popular venue, and we're definitely going to keep that going and continue to ramp up that business.
What, if any, involvement do you have in the Grand Prix?
The Grand Prix, the cycle carts, is coming back next year after a 2-year hiatus. But the Tieton Grand Prix consists of handmade cycle carts that have 6 horsepower pressure washer motors, and they're all handmade. They're all hand machined. They bring in, the group is based in Seattle, but we have drivers who fly in from New Zealand and Great Britain and Canada and all over the country and ship their cars here. And Tieton was the first town to give this group permission to race on city streets. So it's a super fun, great activity.
Well, were you involved in bringing it here? I mean,
a friend of mine.
Okay, friend of yours. Okay. So
yeah.
I can't lay you off the hook that easy. I need to know more about it because when I was over at the Mercantile, I loved the posters.
Yeah.
I ended up buying a couple of the posters because I thought they were so awesome. So these are 6 horsepower pressure washer motors. Everything's handmade.
Yeah.
And they race around the square?
They race around town with the square being the primary circuit. That's where they start. That's where they finish. And these cars are pretty powerful. They can go up to, on a straightaway, 45, 50 miles an hour. The thing that I like about this group is that they are very, very conscious of safety. They're a very funny group of guys and women, and some of the women have actually won more of the trophies than the guys. But there is one trophy you don't want to win, and that's the jerk trophy.
The jerk trophy.
And if you are unsafe in anything you do, you are a candidate for winning that trophy. And if you do, you're not allowed back and you're not allowed to continue to race.
So do they issue that trophy every year or is it as warranted?
As warranted.
Okay. I was gonna say.
Yeah. But if your wheels, say on a bank turn, if your wheels lift off the ground.
Wait a second. There's bank turns?
Well, if you are banking around a turn and you're going too fast and your two wheels lift off the ground, busted.
Really?
Yeah. Not okay.
So another thing, so this intrigues me. I can't wait to come and watch this in person because it just sounds so cool.
Well, in June. I think it's the last Saturday.
Just
of
sounds
June.
awesome.
Yeah.
But a local orchard, there was a race in a local orchard as well? Is that correct?
Yeah, they do that. That's a private event on Sundays. Yeah, the Campbell Orchards lets them just bang around out there, and that's on Sunday because it is so hard on the cars.
They're probably not going to.
Many of them are just wrecked by the end of the day, and need a lot of rebuilding. But cycle carts is a big event for us. We've also started Tour de Tieton, which is the weekend before, and it's a 25 and a 50 mile bike ride. And this year we're adding gravel. So the gravel rides will be on some of the great trails around here.
Goat heads included?
For some reason, the gravel, well, we haven't had any, if you stay away from the shoulders, the goat heads are manageable. Okay. Yeah. The thing that got me with that initial punctures was that I rode into an abandoned parking lot. Oh. And the goat heads had really been allowed to take over. And I'd never encountered a goat head before.
Have you ever stepped on them?
Yeah. Lots. It turns out lots of times. Yeah. And they're not.
Very unpleasant.
They're very unpleasant.
Very unpleasant.
And you see dogs occasionally that have stepped on one and they just freeze and lift their paw.
Our driveway would have some of them on there, and our dog I'd be out walking the dog and he'd just stop, hold the paw up and be like, and off, but yeah, he would just up and stop, yeah.
They are diabolical.
Yes. Yeah. What else is the town? So you've got the Tour de Tieton, you've got the Grand Prix. What else? What else goes on here?
Dia de los Muertos is really a wonderful event. That's at the end of October. And that event just keeps getting bigger and bigger every year. We have a huge community altar, and people can bring photographs and little remembrances of relatives or pets or friends who have died. We have Aztec dancers. We have dancing horses. We have lots of music. Florencio Lazo from Seattle does a big sand painting. We have had, not with COVID, but we have had kids getting all made up as skulls and lots of costumes. That's really a fun event. The one in the first weekend in December is the Holiday Craft Bazaar, and we have about 50 local craftspeople, small business people, and that's a very, very popular event with the community. Lit Fuse now, I think, is 13 years old. It's an annual poetry workshop, and that happens at the end of September. But we've had, MacArthur Prize-winning poets teaching here, and that's really been that was a pretty foundational event for us.
And how'd that get started?
An attorney, Mike, works with, was a poet, and he just, when we started talking about Tieton, he said, I've always wanted to do a poetry festival, and
oh, wow,
here we are. And
here we are, 13 years.
Yeah, got real bragging rights there. And then we also were able to attract the artist Trimpen, and he has one of the old cold storage rooms in the warehouse, and he's filled it with his sculpture that makes music. Trimpen's well known in the Seattle area for having done a number of sound pieces, but the huge Roots and Branches piece at the Experience Music Project is the biggest piece. But he's now living here. He too is a MacArthur winner. And he now has a studio and a performance space where he can just realize many, many of the ambitions he's wanted to over the course of his career. He's also starting to make connections with music programs in the area to help kids think a little more broadly about music and composition and performance. So he'll bring a lot to the community.
That's awesome. Also, over in the cold storage, so you have a gallery, right?
Uh-huh. Yeah.
What's the story there?
Well, the gallery has been there from the beginning. Early on, we started this exhibition called 10 by 10 by 10. And we put out a call. We get submissions from all over the country and a few international submissions every year. It can be any medium, any form. It can be sculpture. It can be two-dimensional. But none of the dimensions can be over 10 inches.
So what was the inspiration for 10 by 10 by 10?
Well, it was 2010, and we just thought, well, it's expensive to ship artwork generally, but if it's only 10 inches, it's going to be affordable. We have had great curators from museums around the country making the selection. This year, I think we had 890 submissions, and it was juried down to about 180. That's pretty typical.
Look, yeah, because they're small. And you guys, that sounds like a lot. It
Yeah.
is, but they're small.
They're small.
Okay.
Yeah. But in terms of galleries, there's another gallery right across from Tieton Maid and Nomad Mercantile on the corner that Michelle Wiles started, and it's called Box Gallery. It's a community gallery. We have a whole bunch of artists in the Yakima Valley and in the general Ellensburg and general area, and they put on shows that change, I think, 10 times a year. Mm-hmm. It's a volunteer gallery, but a percentage of their proceeds go to support the food bank, and the food bank shares the building with the gallery. So, people like the idea of buying artwork that will help the food bank, and the artists certainly like the idea of doing the same, but also having a venue to show their towns.
I asked Michelle when I had it recorded with her, I asked her how to box with 2 X's. And she told me because 2 X's is 100, and they give approximately 100 boxes of food a week. And I thought that was a really interesting. I just like all of you around here seem to have these interesting, tie-ins on things, and I just think that's really kind of cool. So maybe I taught you something on this. There we go.
News to me.
Yeah, there we go.
News to me. Yeah.
We're sitting in a restaurant, closed. What's the story here?
Well, Craig Singer is a trained chef, and he just started toying with the idea of opening a restaurant, small restaurant that he could manage with a little bit of help and present food of the type and quality that he didn't think really existed in the Yakima Valley.
Okay.
It's a small place. It seats maybe 20. Yeah. But it's the food is locally sourced. It's fresh. It's very high quality. And he also has many connections in the wine industry from Yakima. So he's always trying new wines and new offerings. And it's open generally 3 days a week. But one thing that has happened, good news, bad news, his food is so good that he has a lot of jobs doing catering. And when he takes on catering events, he can't be open in the restaurant.
Gotcha.
The catering events make a predictable amount of money. Running a restaurant, not so much. Yeah. But it's proved to be very popular with the locals, and it's kind of nice. Again, one of the real part of the story with Tieton is if you create things that are unexpected discoveries in a town as small as this, the word gets out and the marketing happens pretty much on its own.
Very organic.
Very organic. Yeah. But stepping back a bit, there's this whole idea of community and small agricultural towns surviving, and how do you think about what's happening here to benefit the people who live here now, the kids who live here now? What can happen here that couldn't happen in other places that will actually allow the kids either to stay with their families and do something at a professional level, or that will attract them back if they go away to college and want to return? So there's a big need in the area for coding for the agriculture industry. Turns out Yakima Ag has to farm out a lot of the coding it does to India. Well, that's a huge, huge opportunity for many of the families here with kids. If the kids have a year or 2 years of basic coding experience under their belt, they can get hired immediately at much, much higher wages than they could if they were doing some of the traditional labor in the area. So that presents some really interesting opportunities. I see the Mosaic Studio blowing up. I think that we could really be a pretty big industry here in this town in a matter of a few years once word gets out. I think recreation in this area is so robust and so high quality. We need some more hospitality. With a little more hospitality, we can keep the restaurant and the shop open 7 days a week instead of 3 days a week. Attracting people in the beverage industry to put a brewery in here, a winery. What does it look like if we really kind of build these co-op markets with small businesses that people in town and in this area can do with a little more support. But the thing that I see happening, and the thing that concerns me so much nationally, politically, is this isolation and this insular attitude. They're very protective. They want their community to be their own little fiefdom. They want the political control. They want the school boards. It's blowing up with school boards right now. They want local control. But in fact, the only way to really be successful is to be really good at connecting with needs from outside the area that can be fulfilled locally. And those relationships, I think, are essential to the long-term success of small towns all across the country.
Well, you started with the connecting across the Cascades.
Yeah.
And that seems completely logical.
Yeah.
It seems like a no-brainer.
There's a fear in small towns that people from outside the area want to take over. In fact, I think that it's kind of ingrained in the American ethos. They want small towns to survive and be successful. The people who feel that way don't usually need to be there. They just can't imagine America being America without small towns succeeding. And those resources are very, very real. And they're being done for good reasons. They want to be helpful. And once that message is communicated, and once the people in the town, in these towns, start benefiting from those connections, everybody wins. Everybody wins.
Well, absolutely. You wouldn't have a mosaic shop here if you were just doing mosaics in the Yakima Valley.
No.
It wouldn't. There's not enough market for that.
Right.
So the people you're able to employ here for the mosaic shop would be working somewhere else.
Yeah.
Maybe have to leave the area if they, but they wouldn't be here with a trade.
Right.
And I think craft and trade, I think that's awesome. This little restaurant that we're sitting in, which is not something I would imagine to be seeing in Tieton. I mean, this doesn't look like, the live edge tables and all that wouldn't be here. So I think what's being done here is kudos. I really, and like I said to you before we hit the recording button, this is my third conversation now with people in Tieton. And it's like, I keep sharing it with my friends that I'm like, have you been there? And the answer, honestly, has always been, no, where's Tieton? Yeah. It's not like no one so far has gone, oh yeah, I was up there. Huh. But they're all like, no, where's Tieton? So it's kind of becoming my little mission to like go, okay, I'm going to we'll just get this out here to people that I know. Yeah. When they come here, they'll be very pleasantly surprised and pleased by the whole nature of the neighborhood.
Well, to that point, I want people to know about Tieton. I like the idea of them coming and spending money and supporting. And there are people who say, well, maybe I should move to Tieton. Maybe that's a good idea. And the people I am particularly interested in attracting are the ones who are going to create jobs for the people who live here today. It's that sort of thing. It shouldn't be, it should be, how can I realize some creative commercial ambitions I've always wanted to do? How can I do them in Tieton? I was never able to do them in Seattle or Tacoma or Portland, wherever. Yeah. Right. Yeah. It's been a lot of work. It's been a lot of money that has come out of our own pockets. We don't have kids, so I don't have to put kids through college.
You're not spending their inheritance.
I'm not. No, absolutely not. But it's really been deeply creatively rewarding for us, and it's great to think about some of the ideas that will be coming up and coming online in the next couple of years.
So, well, let me ask you this: what would you like to see? Snap my fingers. We're 5 years in the future now. We're coming back and we're having another conversation. What would Tieton look like to you in 5 years if it was on that path? What more businesses creating jobs for the locals?
Right.
What else here though? I mean, I don't. As I've talked to you, I don't get the impression that, let's put a 12-story building here. That's not the thing at all.
Right.
It's, you want to keep it kind of, I feel, my interpretation, you want to keep it around the town center, the park and all that, keep this feel.
Mm-hmm.
But what is 5 years from now? What is it kind of, forecasting out? What would you see?
Well, people often say that Tieton reminds them of Marfa, Texas. Marfa, Texas is definitely an art town that was the vision of Donald Judd, a sculptor who had a very clear vision of how he wanted to transform an old army base into a world-class installation contemporary art venue.
Never heard of this town.
In the art world, it is Mecca.
Okay.
And jets fly in from Switzerland and all over the world to experience this. The difference between Marfa and Tieton is that it was very much the vision of one man in the art world, and he had a very clear idea of what he wanted to accomplish. He's no longer alive, but as one of the guides on one of the tours I went on said, he micromanages from beyond the grave. But he had a very clear vision.
Okay.
With me, it's much more organic. It's other people's ideas. I really very much would like other people's ideas to be realized here.
Sure.
The big, insanely ambitious project that we have obligated ourselves involves an enormous warehouse that we bought at an estate sale. It's 167,000 square feet. It needs a lot of love and even more money, but keeping that part of the heritage of the town alive, keeping that history and emotional attachment, but also keeping these spaces that when you go inside are so grand and so audacious, it's hard to imagine you wouldn't want to try to preserve these things. These are amazing spaces. So, what are some of the ideas? Well, the double barrel vault ceiling space will be great for weddings and for quinceañeras and trade shows and exhibits. Downstairs, I could see having classrooms where we're offering workshops, destination workshops in bookbinding or letterpress printing or mosaic work or cycle cart fabrication and construction. We also talk about we're going to need so much help with the renovation of that building, putting in a small trade school so that young people who are interested in going into the trades can actually work on the building as they're learning real world experience in masonry and carpentry and so on. In the center part of the building, I badly want to have a really good brewery and put on the third floor roof a beer garden. Be the nicest place. It'd be the nicest place in the state, to have a beer at the end of the day. So those are the sorts of ideas. We need people coming in. We need investment. We need people who kind of share this general approach and spirit. And if you can get your money back out, great. But if you're realizing things that you're really passionate about, there's a lot of compensation in realizing your dreams.
I love that. I do. I think that's a phenomenal philosophy to operate under.
It's gotten me through this far.
Well, as we wrap this up, I feel like I've been asking this question a lot at the end. Well, wait, before we go there, I'm going to ask you a couple of things. So what do you do in town when you're not working at your studio? What do you are you still riding your bike a lot?
Not a lot.
Okay.
I do it occasionally. I've just been taking, long walks. It's so beautiful around here, and you can go through the orchards, and it's such a handsome, quiet kind of place. But truth be told, I have enough balls in the air between the Seattle business and the businesses here. It's 7 days a week.
Okay.
It's, but again, these are all things I've cooked up, I've dreamt up, and it's all work, but I can't blame it on anybody else. But
you're enjoying it for the most part.
Oh,
I mean, there's
totally,
moments,
yeah.
any given day, there's a moment where you're like, well, what have I done? But
yeah,
okay.
But everybody has those moments.
Right. So then to wrap this up, what didn't we cover?
Well, the thing that I'm really proud of is how people in the area, people in the town in particular, were very puzzled when we started buying these buildings. The rumor was we were Microsoft millionaires and we were going to, who knows, we were going to bulldoze everything and do this and do that. But mostly they weren't hostile. They were just puzzled. They didn't quite.
Well, you'd said they've been vacant for a decade.
Yeah.
So why now? After after a decade, you're like, what?
And they thought, well, we couldn't think of how to get the bowling alley back. If there are some other ideas that can at least turn the lights on again, then great, So they're curious, and of course, small town rumors and all that stuff. But nobody was ever belligerent, and for the most part, people were really very supportive and encouraging. But when things started to look better, when it seemed like the town wasn't headed downhill, and it was starting to really feel like there was a future, they started doing things to improve the town or their yards or the involvement a little bit themselves. I really like it when old timers here, old orchardists, or people who have been here for a couple of generations come and say, we just want to thank you. It's nice to know that the town has a future.
Ah, okay. Well, I know I'll be back.
Good.
And so I thank
for
you.
cycle carts, if nothing else. Yeah.
I can't. That looks so. Just from the posters, I'm like, that just looks like such a cool idea.
Yeah, it's really fun.
And so I'm looking forward to seeing that. And this little community speaks to me. I don't know how else to say it. I can't come up with another term, but I have been talking about this town to pretty much anybody that listened to me for the last 2 or 3 months. And I'm excited to see how it continues.
Well, it is the work of many, many, many people, and I am often pushed out there as the front man, and I'm happy to perform that role. But without that initial group of people,
right,
small business owners, without the city of Tieton, without our business neighbors here in the area, without the support of people like Rob and Michelle and the Campbells and other orchardists in the area, there's no way we could have done any of this. So it really, I think if if anything, perhaps I've provided some creative leadership and some vision. But people will respond if the idea is good, if it makes sense. People will respond in a positive way, and I appreciate every single bit of help they've offered along the years.
Okay. Well, thank you for making this happen.
Thank you. It's been fun.
Yeah.
Join us next time for another episode of the Exploring Washington State podcast.